Oh, good evening, everybody. Keith here. Hoping everybody's had a good day, enjoying life, living life, loving life. How'd you guys do on Father's Day? Did you make out like bandits?
Most likely she'll be here Monday and she'll call me when she leaves Minneapolis.
Oh, give it another minute or two here and we'll get started.
Hey Keith, I've been doing some research, right? And I
Okay.
found that a fish, as the etymology of the word, is means also a man. And I was looking at it. A fish means like they were saying like a man, like a fish out of water. You drink like a fish. And the term they used to use that back in the days when a woman say a man was a good catch. He was a fish.
Yep. Let me see if I can find it.
And then I was looking at scripture and all of that. I was like, man, that was right on the money.
Okay. Let me find the scripture to back it up.
And then I was looking at, right, the word semen, right? As sperm, as it relates to sperm, they call it semen.
Yes. Yes, you should see the Coast Guard. Coast Guard has the definition for semen. Okay.
So I was
If we look, let me get my screen share up here. If we look at the ancient Hebrew script, we see seed, fish, activity, life, man, on side, desire, need. It almost looks the same. The other one, I don't know if it's this chart or the other chart. Let me see here. Yeah, it's the same. But this gives you the denotation in numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then when they go from 10, they don't go to 11, they go 20, 30, 40, 50. So when they reach 100, they go 200, 300, 400. And that's how they enumerate the alphabet. So the alphabet itself is a numerical equivalent to a different counting system. So everything that we take in our alphabet and enumerate it differently, we have changed not only the symbolic reference, but the numerical reference. Okay. Again, thanks everybody for joining me. Again, I hope everybody had a good, happy Father's Day and everything. And good day today, of course. Good day every day. We're supposed to enjoy life. And tonight I wanted to get started. We were talking about security and stuff last time. And when we talk about security, we're talking about their security instruments, their commercial liens. And in fact, all of those commercial securities derive under the maritime securities. And as I discussed before, you defeat the commercial lien with a maritime lien. The maritime lien is determined as a sacred lien, and therefore a maritime security would by reason and logic mean a sacred security. Well, when we talk about security, we talk about escrow. And that's what securitizes things, is that there's a third person somewhere involved with an escrow account, a holding. and they are known as a holding company because they are holding assets in escrow. So under in just like Wikipedia, I like Investopedia when I'm talking about financial terms. So I go to Investopedia. It says, what is escrow? Escrow is a legal concept. Okay, so it's just a concept still. It's not a law. It's a concept. So if it's only a concept, how can they enforce something that they call a law, saying that you have to have something in escrow when it's only a concept? Okay. Describing a financial instrument. So the concept is describing a financial instrument. We know today the financial instrument is known as a legal tender or negotiable instrument. So describing a financial instrument is a negotiable instrument. And we know financial is negotiable because the market itself, as they profess, fluctuates. So it is negotiable, whereby an asset or escrow money is held by a third party on behalf of two other parties that are in the process of completing a transaction. So it's been initiated, but it hasn't been finalized. It is in the process. So it is not just one event, it is incidental to several events, and it could last for 3-4 decades, as we see in developing countries. Does that sound like the same thing as a bankruptcy? It's a confirmed plan of two parties that are in process of completing a transaction that might possibly be, a merger of the two parties. Yeah, to settle all the debts between the two parties or from the two parties, so that there's equal consideration, equal benefit of forgiveness and a fresh start under a resurrection of a new name. I mean, it's all the same. And when we're talking about this, escrow is a legal concept describing a financial instrument whereby an asset or escrow money is held by a third party on behalf of two other parties. So who, in effect, is the escrow agent that we should be thinking about today? It's known as the indispensable party. It's the sponsor. It's the United States. It's the one that grants everything. They are the ones that profess to hold all property in abeyance until a rightful and valid claimant comes forward. So the rightful and valid claimant is one of these two parties completing a transaction. The transaction was started when mom signed as an informant, and that transaction was a grant. Okay, that's what they're holding in escrow, is a document under a grant of trust, whereby they complete transactions otherwise known as contracts. Accounts might include escrow fees managed by agents who hold funds or assets until receiving appropriate instructions. They never get appropriate instructions unless you give it to them. You're the beneficiary. You have to dismiss the trustee that has had all these documents in custody by requiring them to hand over those documents, and then making the value of those documents stated as the interest of the United States, and then assigning them back in the interest of the United States. That is the indispensable party that originated the grant for them to use Federal Reserve notes or other obligations of the United States against anybody. Therefore, they have to have permission first. or until the fulfillment of predetermined contractual obligations. These are the debts previously contracted. This is the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Code, the Code of Federal Regulations, the Law of Nations, their charter. It's all of these things that they've already written down. It's already there. Money suggested as a replacement for a certified or cashier's check. Now, remember back a few Zooms ago, I was talking about the banker's acceptance and how it is synonymous with a certified check, money order, international bill of exchange, letter of credit. That's all we're doing. We're correcting the record for the letter of credit that's already there. Where do they get their credit from? The next part says, understanding escrow is a process used when two parties are in the process of completing a transaction. Transfer action. If I'm not performing a transfer action, then there is no need for an escrow. Simple contracts are mere gifts. It's where they get the idea of a trust. That somehow a trust has to be formed by a mere gift so that somebody can make the transfer. No, the grantor just gives it. It's not a transfer, it's a gift. I am to give freely that which was freely given. So if you want to profess a transfer, it's from him, right? Fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by name. You are mine. I'm not a trustee or a beneficiary. In that case, I'm actually his property. What do you think of that? How's that for a transaction? Don't know what they're talking about. I don't need an escrow. I am the escrow. How's that? And there is uncertainty over whether one party or another will be able to fulfill their obligations. I don't think the United States can fulfill their obligation. That escrow account is based on fiat currencies known as commercial paper, negotiable instruments that are at all times negotiable. Contexts that use escrow include internet transactions, banking, intellectual property every time you speak, real estate, mergers and acquisitions. Mergers as opposed to acquisitions. Acquisitions are the acquiring under Federal Acquisitions Act, and they require contract terms and conditions to implement statutes or executive orders and law and many more. That's only a context. Remember, it's still just a concept. It's not a law. It's a concept in law. It's a concept in principles of law. Hell, it's a concept in religion. Consider a company that is selling goods internationally. That company requires assurance that it will receive payment when goods reach their destination. The buyer, for their part, is prepared to pay for the goods only if they arrive in good condition. This is good faith. The buyer can place the funds in escrow with an agent with instructions to disperse them to the seller once the goods arrive in a suitable state. What I want to point out here is this is the birth certificate. When it reaches the port, what's happening is somebody is given assurance on an international sales of goods that once they arrived at port, they were in good shape. However, they have not reached their final destination. Because in the transfer thereof, the transactions thereof, they're still under contract and they're never reaching their final destination because everybody is is assumed to be in interacting with this international sales of goods. You're considered to be selling the goods every transaction you do it. You're not actually being considered the final destination, the end user, the last mile. The buyer, for their part, what is their part? Is it the end user at the last mile? Or is it in the middle of the transaction somewhere to buy it from someone else and then to sell it to another buyer? See, if you're not buying and selling and you're just the end user, you're the beneficiary that can dismiss the trustee, acquire the property appropriately to have the account settled, and collapse that trust. In collapsing that trust, it's because a merger happened with the beneficiary and the property, which automatically collapses the trust. And therefore, in order to resurrect the assets, it has to be done under a new name. Otherwise, they're still considered abandoned. Now you have assets to develop your standing as a nation of one. The buyer can place the funds in escrow with an agent with instructions to disburse them to the seller. The buyer to the seller once the goods arrive in a suit able state. Are you going to file a suit? Are you able to file a suit? No. That would be a commercial transaction, people. Quit doing it. Type of escrow. Escrow accounts can apply to real estate transactions. Placing the funds in escrow allows the buyer to perform due diligence on a potential acquisition. This is the responsibility of anybody is in the position of purchasing, buying, whatever like that. It's your due diligence. You have to know what's going on. Caveat: buyer beware. Buyer beware. He is a respecter of no persons. Escrow accounts, and neither will they. They won't respect that person either. That person is meant for human trafficking. It is meant for trafficking of persons. It is not meant to be respected. It is not meant to be reviewed. It is meant to be observed as it is and let it be. Escrow accounts also assure the seller that the buyer can close on the purchase. So what's this foreclosure? Okay, let's comprehend this. Escrow accounts also assure the seller that the buyer can close on the purchase. So if the bank is the one that's foreclosing, are they saying that they are the seller? So shouldn't you be closing on the purchase first? Isn't that what the closing is all about? To prevent their foreclosure? So somewhere along the line, people aren't closing on the purchase properly. Why not? Because you're not making the proper assignments. You're not doing your due diligence and acquiring that property as the beneficiary. The lender is the person. Okay. The guy on the other end, the end user at the last mile, is the beneficiary. So now the beneficiary has the title of the person. And guess what? The person is the one that settles the accounts. So even if you got just a prison ID and a loan document, there you go. There's your settlement. That prison ID works just like a driver's license, a broker's realtor license, a banker's license, any other kind of license. It's a license to perform the transaction at hand with personal jurisdiction. For example, an escrow account can be used for the sale of a house. If there are conditions attached to the sale, such as the passing of an inspection of the record, please. before we can perform any transaction of capital assets, the transfer of capital assets in this transaction, I need to make sure that there was a proper entry of capital assets that can then be transferred. Because if there was no proper entry, then I contest the record, and I now claim my right to place a proper entry into the record. The buyer and seller may agree to use escrow. Here's my documentation that supersedes theirs. That's not an escrow. It's a public record. Therefore, it's not being held by a private third party. Here, I'm going to deliver my escrow documentation to a private third party holding escrow. Do you agree? Why would they do that? Because it's a banker's acceptance. It's the negotiable instrument that's going to allow me to accept at par value the never-ending drawdown credit account that gets zeroed out every quarter. So no matter how much I draw down off of that $10 million, I'll never be able to spend it. I might be able to, maybe make it 50 million. Hell, let's make it 250 million just for shits and squiggles. The concept is that it's never ending because you draw down on it and it's all donations. Donations are 100% return. So how could you possibly spend from it? It's called transitional credits. That's what's in escrow, the agreement. In this case, the buyer of the property deposits the payment amount for the house in an escrow account held by a third party. That's that letter of credit, irrevocable letter of credit through the Postal Service. Escrow can also refer to an escrow account that is set up at the time of mortgage closing. Are we closing on the purchase or are we closing on the mortgage? See what happens here? When you read this stuff, you comprehend there are different things going on. You better comprehend what's going on. They started out with a mortgage that's never complete. The terms of the first mortgage, I believe, are a lease agreement of minimum of 99 years. A sublease is 50 years. So if you've got a mortgage going on for 30 years, are you a subleaser? Are you closing on somebody else's sublease that's 50 years or 99 years? How can you do that if it's not even over? Or do you have the authority to do a call warrant and call all those bonds back? If you're the principal, yeah. And that's what you do. You call them in on their fraud. The fraud is their mortgages are 99-year leases under 50-year lease, and you're under a 30-year lease on a fucking real estate loan for fish farming. Excuse my language. With this escrow, or with this, the escrow account houses future homeowners' insurance and property tax payments. Call warrant is a financial instrument. There's that financial instrument again. So could you do a call warrant in with your banker's acceptance? Most certainly. Can you do a letter of credit in with your banker's acceptance? Most certainly. Can you do your peace treaty in with your banker's acceptance? Most certainly. Can you do your declaration of independence in your banker's acceptance? Most certainly. Age and majority. Isn't those primary documents, aren't those the statements you have to give in a banker's acceptance, showing you have the authority to make such a sound decision of sound mind and body? That gives the holder the right to buy the underlying stock shares at a specific price on or before a specified date. Call warrants are often included in new equity. Remember that merger to create a new name, new equity, or debt offering from a company. See, we're not going to offer debt. We're going to come in new equity. We're going to clear the record. We're going to settle all accounts so that there is no more debt. The United States is tired of being in debt. I'm going to help resolve that debt. Liquidity. Liquidity refers to the efficiency or ease with which an asset or security can be converted into ready cash without affecting its market price. So it's basically your terms and conditions saying, okay, I'm not going to allow it to affect your market price, and I'll take the fair market value according to my fair value as principal, and we're done with it. Now I've got my value, you've got your value, and you keep on negotiating that dumb person. I no longer, I've merged and resurrected under a new name. It no longer affects me. There's your segregation. Collateral trust bond. This is what we're talking about. A collateral trust bond is a bond that is secured by one or more financial assets. When we place that bond in the custody of the Postal Service, transfer that title with expenses incidental to the transfer of title to the Postal Service, they have a postal realty trust, and they have financial assets secured there. And now you have one or more financial assets. You got your financial assets, which is your word. Your yay is your yay. You recognize the record for what it is. It's already stated, as it is written, so shall it be. Such as shares of stocks or other bonds, I have a certificate of live birth, which seems to be in stock or bond form. That is the banking instrument that is going to be accepted by a banker, not a bank. I have a capacity as a banker, and I am the intended recipient. And now I transfer it back with the interests of the United States assigned for them to convey to the United States so that they can fulfill their contract with the United States for full acquittance and discharge, recognize me as the one that donated everything as the grantee, absolute settler. That is that is deposited and held by a trustee for the holders of the bond. Now they are holders of the bond. They now have custody with assignment. Now their obligations can be fulfilled. They are no longer presumed or assumed. The bond is perceived as a safer investment than an unsecured bond, since the assets could be sold to pay the bondholder if necessary. Now, what happens there is if they're holding their own assets, see that Postal Realty Trust? Who owns the assets? The United States or the postal system? Now, who's subject to whose assets? Who's claiming what's for assets? Can the United States claim anything for assets? No. Just the documentation. That's the only thing they can profess as an asset is these codes. U.S. Code, Code of Federal Regulations, the things they've adopted through the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Treaty of Berne, the Vienna Conventions, all those. They are subject themselves to them. A collateral trust bond may also be called a collateral trust certificate or collateral trust note. Is that the same thing as a certified check? Letter of credit, bill of exchange, banker's acceptance. Do we see what's happening here? That's all you're doing. I don't know what happened there. I think I requested to go pro. Ha! Accidentally. I meant to shut it down. Anyway, that's the end of it, folks. That's what we're looking at. They're proposing that they hold something in escrow and that we have an interest in it. Well, our interest in it is the fraud, waste, and abuse of the indoctrination of us having to sign these documents in an unauthorized capacity all our life and not realizing it. And through mutual mistakes, we get to make a claim, not an administrative process in contract, but a claim against the administrative process for those mutual mistakes. As long as we can make sure that we can point out what the mutual mistake is so they can't rebut it. They have to agree. They have to approve it. It's an offer and acceptance in, on, and for the public record. So if I'm really involved in this real estate investment loan or real estate loan at the bank, and this banker's trying to convince me that I'm going to get a real estate loan, shouldn't it be up to my obligation now that I know that it's the intent for fish farming? Shouldn't I let him know that unless this loan is applicable to a fish farm, then he can't project a real estate loan? Now, if I pose that and that sucker goes to the next guy and proposes that he's going to give him a real estate loan, and he now has this knowledge, but he doesn't tell this sucker on the other because he wants to sell this guy a real estate loan, is that fraud? It's my duty to spread this knowledge, do so peacefully, and ask for peaceful Socratic rebuttal, because that's the way I see it. A real estate loan means I have to be a farmer or a rancher. And if I'm a farmer, my intent has to be fish farming, nothing else. And if I'm a rancher and I'm involved in agriculture, which means cultivating, multiple cultivations, and if I'm planting corn, it means that it's a place for processing and manufacturing eggs. I've got to let this information out. It's my obligation. And this is how we defeat their record and prove that there's something wrong. It's inconsistent. So therefore, you can't enforce what is not consistent. What is consistent is the scriptures and the spirituality of where it comes from, the substance, the intent. That is what is genuine. Because I assure you, it is never my genuine intent. Had I known that I was required to take an oath of office in order to first be able to perform the functions of public office, to then profess a trade or business, so I could use an automobile, at least 50% of its use on the public highways for trade or business, with the intent of federal income tax, I'd have never done it. Let alone had I known that I was supposed to make a statement, handwritten statement, and wet ink signed, which I've never done, which proves I never intended that. De novo, go all the way back to the beginning, and there was never the proper, true intent required, ever. Correct your records, please. Expunge all of the errors in the interest of the United States for a true and correct record. Anyway, we got 5.5 minutes left. Sorry, I kept rambling, but floor is open. Go, folks. Go for
it. Hi, Keith. So, if in fact we're supposed to be self-governing, that's put, and looking at the quote-unquote founding fathers, it seems to me like maybe some people should take an oath, since those offices are vacated, and all that pay, even though private man and woman.
You broke up badly there, dear.
You couldn't hear what I said?
You broke up. It'll come over in the replay.
So my question always is like, what are we supposed to be? We're supposed to be self-governing for our own nation, correct?
Yeah.
And the offices are actually vacant, correct?
Correct. And they're meant to be. They're not there. See, when it comes to a governing body, there's not supposed to be an office. See, our founding forefathers went down to a local building that one of them happened to own, whether it be a local general store or the livery or something, and held their meetings there. And they did it on their own time. without pecuniary compensation. And that's the true governing body, according to Romans 13. For there is no power that which is ordained, but that which is ordained of God. And he doesn't ordain money. He's a respecter of no persons. So he wouldn't ordain power in person. He would only ordain it in privacy. And that's why they held their meetings in privacy in one of their own places. But they did it for the benefit of all.
But wasn't that like the head of the family? You know, like back in the ancient times, that
Yes.
the head
Yes.
of the family would go down to the city gates, and because of the way that it was set up, which were the Levites, of course, there was the transition to Melchizedek, but they were always given 10%. They were actually given taxes, and
Yes.
because they stood in gap for the people. And
Right.
so I, for a long time, was like, leave me alone. I want nothing to do with you. But then it's like, well, wait a second. We're supposed to be self-governing, and these psychopaths that are destroying nature are the ones who are pretending that they're in these offices. I mean, it's just a thought, like
Well,
maybe we are supposed to be the ones to take those
see,
commitments.
And I think a lot of people have it confused too, because when we're self-governing, it doesn't mean that we go out there and enforce our scriptural law or what we think is governing ethics and principles upon other people. Again, the scripture tells us that we're supposed to pray in private. So if we're going to self-govern, that is our self-governing, is the way we pray and the way we act. And so in order to do so, we're supposed to do that stuff in private. When we go out in public and give those tithes, we're not supposed to do it at the gate. We're supposed to take somebody in private and give the tithe in private. So still no tithe is ever recognized.
Isn't that the difference between public law and private law?
Yeah.
And they're actually acting in a private capacity?
Yes, and they make it a public view. And that's the desecration of Romans 13, verse 1.
Right.
They're putting it in a public view and letting the public judge you.
Right.
You go to public school,
you
go to public school and they say leave no child behind. Well, that's a public view. All those other children see you in the same thing. They shouldn't. It's none of their business. It's none of the teacher's business.
But
they're supposed to be learning and educating each other spiritually.
But aren't they operating in a private membership capacity? And they go into these contracts to offer services for which is the United States, for the United States of America.
In the public capacity, yes.
In a public capacity, but they're actually still operating in the private. And that's the part that, I saw a post where someone was asking you about with the UPBU and being signatory, is that the whole point, that's what those bonds are. All they are the GSA contracts. And once someone says, hey, I actually have a family business I'm supposed to operate with, and that's what this government, whatever it is supposed to be protecting, right? The rights of the private man or woman. And that requires an actual contract, correct?
Yep.
And that's what that bond is. And I think that
48 CFR 52.212-5, contract terms and conditions required.
Yeah. I mean, did you already go over that and I missed that, Keith?
Not tonight, but we are short on time, and we will see you again tomorrow night. We will talk about it then if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Bless y'all.
Okay, love you. Bye.
Love you.
Could you give an example next time, Keith?
Remind me.
Oh, all right.
Find the kill off.
Love you. Bye.